and to provide an update and discuss Judge Mehta's ruling, potential remedies, ramifications on the United States versus Google, please help me welcome to the stage an esteemed panel. We're going to start off with Mr. Ron Schnell. He is the former head of the technical committee that enforced the antitrust remedy against Microsoft. You may recognize him also because he testified in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. But you could talk about that over drinks later. Joining us on stage will also be Lauren Weinstein, who's a partner at a Washington, D.C. law firm focused on antitrust litigation, including the Google Play Store hearing. And Sumit Sharma, a public policy economist leading advocacy on U.S. competition, formerly at Consumer Reports. This conversation will be moderated by Mr. Adam Epstein.
Thank you all for joining today, especially Lauren, who is in the late stages of
extremely pregnant.
Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Adam, for having me.
Defying orders and coming up anyway from DC. We met Lauren last year. If you were here, it was our most highly rated panel after the impact happened. I don't know if it was as exciting when it was happening, but Lauren's law partner, Eric Posner, was on stage talking through the liability aspect. Got to meet Lauren through that. She's advised us on the remedy aspect and has made me sound smart on podcasts, which I appreciate. So thank you to Lauren. Ron Schnell, we've just been introduced to as the former head of the technical committee for the Microsoft case. So the last time that the government implemented a remedy successfully in a big tech, it was Ron and his team that did that. So he has some interesting perspectives for us. And then Sumit Sharma, who we came across because he wrote one of the first papers on what a remedy could look like that would benefit the consumer. Be a little bit more open here. And we were very impressed with what Sumit wrote, and we've had a chance to talk to him as time's gone on. So thank you all for joining. And maybe, Lauren, I'll start with you, since you're the legal expert. You could maybe just set the stage. There's a lot of trials going on. You were involved in Google Play. We just had Michael read us through what happened with the search trial and, of course, the ad tech trials occurring right now in Virginia. So if you wouldn't mind just sort of giving some perspective to the team.
Sure. So happy to set the stage a little bit. And thanks so much, Adam, for having me here today. It's great to meet all of you and learn about what you do so we can help facilitate that. So let's go back to 2019, 2020, if we can remember pre-pandemic times. The government, DOJ, and a group of states issued civil investigative demands to Google related to at least two aspects of its business: the Android App Store, which is called the Google Play Store, and search and text advertising on search. So the government was interested in what Google was doing, poked around, uncovered anti-competitive practices in both markets, and then the cases kind of bifurcated into two cases. One is the Google Play litigation filed in 2020 in the Northern District of California, and the other one is the Google Search litigation that Adam opened the day by talking about, and Michael just walked us through. In the Google Play litigation, I represented the group of 39 states that was prosecuting Google alongside a consumer class, Epic Games, who you probably all know is the maker of Fortnite, and Match.com. And Ron and I worked together on that litigation, is how we got to know each other. And the allegations there were that Google, through a series of exclusive contracts with mobile phone networks and OEMs, original equipment manufacturers like Samsung, had entered into exclusive deals by which they would pay revenue share to have the Google Play Store as either the exclusive and later just the default on phones. And through that and other technical measures that we don't have to get into today, discouraged competition from other competitor stores, would-be competitor stores. For example, the Epic Games store. We litigated this case for quite some time, and in 2023, about a year ago today, or about a year ago today, the state settled with Google for $800 million and a series of different kinds of injunctive relief that was extremely meaningful and historic. Epic proceeded to trial and won in a jury trial against Google. Fantastic result, and now Judge Donato is trying to figure out what remedy he should impose for Google's monopolization of that market. At the same time, in Washington, D.C., the DOJ, along with a group of 49 states, was prosecuting Google for monopolizing the search and related advertising markets. As you all saw, that culminated in a 10-week trial and a historic liability verdict that we haven't seen really since Microsoft in 2000. And we will see what Judge Mehta does in the remedies stage, and that's something that we're working really closely on to try and open up competition in a meaningful way for search and search text ads. Now, just a little ways away from Judge Mehta's courtroom in D.C. in the Eastern District of Virginia, Judge Brinkema is trying a case brought by the Department of Justice and a group of states as well against Google for monopolizing different aspects of advertising technology. The EDVA is famously known as the Rocket Docket. That case was filed maybe like a year and a half ago. It's already in trial, and Judge Brinkema is already asking. It's a bench trial. And Judge Brinkema is already asking very interesting questions about what remedy to impose. That trial is only projected to last a couple more weeks, so we should be getting a liability decision, probably a month or so after that, a few months after that.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. So where we are with the search trial now is liability has been established. There is an opportunity for private litigation. So those of you who you saw the judge found that the super competitive pricing means that you've been overcharged for Google search. You can bring suit. It's something to know. If you're an agency or a group of agencies or an advertiser, a percentage of your spend over the last however many years could be not only rebated back to you, but it's triple damages when you're in the Sherman Act. So there's a potential for fines, there's a potential for damages for private litigants. And what the judge is going to want to do in this case is, he said, try to restore competition back into both search results and into the search ads business, and which is obviously where we have some thoughts. Now, one of the things that we realized as we started talking to the DOJ is they felt very confident about the liability part of their case, and they were not as confident about how to have a remedy that would actually lead to the outcome and result that they want, which is competition in search and advertising, because Google's been so dominant for so long. They are actively asking for practitioners, people in the space, to get together and start to talk about these issues and think through practically what could happen to restore competition. So one of the reasons we wanted to bring this up today was to invite all of you to start thinking about these issues, take them back into your organizations, certainly reach out to myself, Michael, or Lauren, if you're interested in getting involved in that. We do, and we have written a 9-page memo, which I think is available for you guys to take home with you. And it's been submitted to the DOJ. They're in reviewing it. It's also been submitted to the states. And it really lays out in black and white what the ideal outcome would be, what the court order remedy would be, and the specific discovery that the court would have to undertake during this next phase, which is going to start relatively soon, it looks like, and will absolutely conclude, it looks like, by the end of April, with the decision expected, I'd say, again in August of next year.
Yeah, we were in court just a couple weeks ago to talk about scheduling issues, and Judge Mehta said that he's expecting to issue his decision on remedies by August of 2025, which may seem like a very long time by objective person standards, but it's relatively quick for litigation standards.
Right. So maybe I'll start with Sumit, just because you were so early on this, and you come from a consumer perspective, and you're with Consumer Reports, and you wrote a report about how you sort of thought through the various remedies. We've heard folks talk about, you got to break up Google, although we never really hear more than that when it comes to search about what the actual remedy would be. And then there's what we call injunctive relief, which is putting some restrictions on how Google interacts with their publishers, with their advertisers. And you've kind of investigated that, and you have some thoughts. I'd just love to.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me here. So yeah, first let me say thanks. It's great to be in a room full of practitioners here discussing antitrust rulings. It just shows how the music has changed. 2 years ago, there was and still in DC, there's the other side which has a lot of pessimism on whether competition can be introduced, whether it's ever possible to break open the gate that Google's shut. And this enthusiasm here is great. And as Adam mentioned, we need more ideas to paint an alternative picture on how this could work. And how I looked at this was to say, well, any remedies, they need to be practical, they need to be implementable, they have to benefit the consumers. And so the 3 ways I think that can be done is, first of all, open up, jumpstart competition, right? And there are 2 ways to look at this. One is, can there be competitors like Google who also do general search, who can come into the market and compete with Google, and that would create more options. And that would be the folks like the DuckDuckGo, for example, or Bing. But that, I think, is only looking at a part of it. The other way to get more competition is you break up that search box, and instead of sending all search to Google, you break up search and send some queries to folks like Ad Marketplace, other queries to Google. So you also open up the supply side a lot more than just copycat to Google, right? So that's one way to do it. In terms of remedies, I think what you need is, of course, to stop these exclusive default agreements and force Google to pay the same per click, even if the search property like Safari is not sending them all their traffic. So Safari or other folks should have the option of sending some traffic to DuckDuckGo, let's say, some traffic to their own search engine, their own AI, and then some to Google. And that would really open up the marketplace and allow people to start getting in there. The other is, so that's the supply side, I think, right, to get that competition in there. On the demand side, something like choice screens can work. And we heard from Mozilla that that's been somewhat successful in Europe. And there is the opportunity to learn from what's being done in Europe and implement it here. So we're not really starting from zero when it comes to remedies here. We can draw on that experience. So I think those are the 2 practical sides I look at, the supply side and the demand side. The other issue with breakups is they're going to be complicated, and Google is going to fight them, appeal them. So I think timing is very important here, given where we are today with AI and all these new technologies coming in. So the sooner we get remedies, the more likely it is that those remedies are going to be successful in opening up competition in whatever comes next. If the DOJ, in my view, keeps fighting for structural remedies or other remedies which will be much harder to implement and which will have much more pushback from Google, then maybe you don't get remedies for another 5 years. It's too late. You need them in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Sumit. And so I'll set up again, just to go a little deeper on that. So think of Apple Safari is obviously on your phone, and when you do a search into the search bar there, you're force funneled to the Google search result page. The idea of an injunctive remedy would move the locus of control from the search result page on Google back into the Apple Safari, say, new tab page, so that Apple can send the query from the user to multiple search results providers, including AI, Gen AI search providers, and to multiple search ad monetization platforms, including, obviously, Ad Marketplace. This would solve the biggest problem that we all have, which is we just don't get to see the queries that are exclusively controlled under the distribution agreements that Google has. So the first idea would stop those exclusive agreements. Second, to allow the locus of control for the search experience to go away from the Google SERP page and into the actual open web property where the user is. And that kind of makes perfect sense. Why would you force a user to go to a search result page before they go to one of your sites to transact? But the reason is because Google wants to have the toll and wants to be able to control the data and the pricing of the user. So that is sort of the heart of the remedy that the practitioners are starting to propose. And it's to allow for competition to occur closer to where the user is. The benefits to advertisers from competition would obviously be transparency. We'd all be very interested in showing you what media channels and publishers you're bidding on. and you'd have more control, and obviously with more competition, lower prices. There's no doubt that Google is, because of super competitive pricing, making monopoly margins on your search. So the numbers that came out from the trial, to get a little bit more specific, Google pays Apple $20 billion a year, and yet half of Google's clicks in the United States come from those Apple clicks, which they're now selling for about $70 billion a year. So you can already see that if you're paying 20 and you're making 70, and you guys are the ones paying the 70, by the way, there's an ability to pay more to Apple, charge it less to the advertisers, still make a margin that is required to run a very complicated search ads business, and allow for more choice to consumers. So the money is there, the volume is there. It's really these contractual agreements that are stopping what would naturally be occurring in a competitive marketplace. So we think this is actually a relatively simple solution. As Sumit mentioned, and we'll talk to Ron about this in a second, you can get into very complicated solutions, like they should divest Chrome, or they should allow everybody to see all their algorithms, and some crazy idea that I'm not sure how that would work. But the bottom line is that there's a relatively straightforward and simple way to bring transparency and competitiveness and improve the user experience that is that's workable. In fact, we were able to write about it in 9 pages. So that's the I think framework we're talking about. That's the sort of specifics of what it would mean for you. And this is something that could happen within a year or two. And what we're really talking about is that search on the open web becomes what search advertising is, right? It's not closed off in one place, that literally every browser, every OEM, Samsung, AT&T, what have you, are now able to facilitate auctions on their own. They're able to customize the search experience. We didn't get into all the findings around search results themselves, but any time that Samsung or Apple try to move a single pixel in their search experience to customize it for their users, they would get an email from Google saying, you're in violation of our agreement, revert back to the previous user experience. That's an incredibly high level of control for Google, obviously. The other thing to consider here is that with a structural remedy is that we really don't want to put these browsers who currently rely on Google for the majority of the revenue out of business, right? Like that would be cutting off our nose to spite our face. If we're coming up with some remedy that makes it so there's just no way for browsers to monetize their extremely valuable search traffic, we've gone in the wrong direction. So first it's do no harm, and then second it's bring competition. The way we think about it is things could be the exact same as they are. If Google always has the best ads and always has the best results, fine. Then the current ceiling of the experience becomes the new floor. And then any kind of experimentation, testing, innovation that can develop on top of the current floor obviously benefits advertisers and consumers. So that's a little bit of how we're thinking about the remedy. And I think that's a great time to bring you in, Ron, because you were part of a Microsoft case that started with the judge having a structural remedy. He was going to break apart Microsoft, and that got appealed. It did not get upheld. Then they tried to figure out some injunctive remedies. That didn't go too well until they brought in a technical consultant, and you built out a team. And if you could maybe just talk about your experiences in what actually works and what we can learn from putting a remedy in place. And I'll just one more second. What was going on in the Microsoft case is Microsoft had an operating system called Windows, and they were forcing everybody to use Internet Explorer, is what it was called at the time. It's called Edge now, their browser. And it was very hard to decouple. It was very hard to curate your own browser experience. Once Ron did what Ron did with his team, that was decoupled, and now you may all be running on PCs, and you never use the Edge browser at all. You're using Chrome or Firefox or whatever it is. That's because of the work that Ron did back in the early 2000s. So with that, Ron, please.
Thanks for having me. So yeah, the technical committee was something that really had never been done before. Usually the monitorship of a remedy is going to be was a retired judge who knew nothing about technology, and everybody who worked on this case realized pretty early, in particular the states and the DOJ, that would not work in this case. You needed somebody, at the time they were thinking, who would understand the technology and can call out Microsoft when they did something that they weren't supposed to do or whatever. So they called for the formation of a technical committee, which was made up of 3 people. One was nominated by DOJ, one was nominated by Microsoft, and then the 2 of them nominated a 3rd person. And those 3 people were Harry Saul by the DOJ, Franklin Fite from Microsoft, and Skip Stritter from the 2 of them. So they originally thought they were going to be able to handle this on their own. And then Microsoft did things like dump 40,000 pages of technical documentation on them, and they realized they were going to have to set up a company, like a proper nonprofit company to do this. And they brought me in to run that company. So that's how I got involved. And they called me, and I dragged my wife and kids kicking and screaming out to Seattle from Miami because this sounded like something really cool to do, and it really was. Basically, we had the powers of a special master of the court. If we asked anyone at Microsoft a question by court order, they had to answer us truthfully. We could demand to see anyone and ask, at any time, and they had to come to us. They could bring a lawyer, and we could see any source code, any documentation. But it was a highly technical project. I ended up over the course of the 6.5 years, only supposed to be a year and a half, but based on what we found, the judge kept finding them not in compliance with the remedy. Over that time, I hired 93 people across 3 offices, 2 in Seattle and 1 in Palo Alto. And we had to open the Palo Alto one because we ran out of people in Seattle who were willing to work, against Microsoft because they created so much wealth there. But it was, it was an amazing experience for me. And, we got to do usually what you just think of as like a think tank. It was like really high-tech stuff, which if you just read the final judgment and the remedy, you might not think that because a lot of it has to do with browsers and just testing to make sure Chrome and others could work on Windows, and that they weren't strong-arming anyone. We did a lot of investigation of that kind of stuff. But there was some really technical stuff, like Microsoft had to document in great detail all of their proprietary communications protocols that went from Windows Client to Windows Server and back, so that a competitor could create a competing server that could talk to the monopoly of Windows desktops out there. And that turns out to be really hard to do, and that was tens of thousands of pages of documentation. And our role, just with that one section of the final judgment, was to make sure that those documents are accurate and complete. So we did that in a number of ways, including pretending to be competitors and creating these servers and server elements to run on Linux, and just by reference to the documentation and just see if they worked with the Windows clients. And then we published bug reports against the documentation to the tune of sometimes 10,000 a month. So it was hard work. We had probably the best technology people in the world working on it. And like I said, it was a lot of fun. But reading through your memo, and a lot of people worked on this memo, I can see a lot of similarities, and I can see a lot of fun for someone who, great. It would be great if it would be me, who's sort of enforcing a remedy like this. I'm not married to any particular remedy really, because that's my role, is really to just see what can be done from a technology standpoint to whatever the remedy is. But these kind of terms that you and others have suggested are very amenable to technology solutions. So some of it has to do with Google opening up via API their search results, their text search results, so that somebody can grab those results and display it the way they want to, right? Or not display it the way they want to, or display other things along with it, or put it in this order or that order. And that's the kind of thing that a technical committee could look at and programmatically, make sure not only that it's working, but it's working with no latency, no delay, from one company compared to another, that the rankings are appropriate. Things like that is the same kind of stuff that we looked at in Microsoft.
And we've got to talk a little bit about your experience there, and a couple of things stuck out at me. One is, we don't have like a regulatory body for the internet. We talked about that. Kara Swisher had a lot of thoughts on that. And what you really built was a regulatory body for Microsoft and for this opinion. And this would be kind of the same idea here, is that there'd be a regulator on how Google interacted with publishers and how they interacted with advertisers and how they were able to open up their APIs. And what struck me about this, and sort of my favorite type of regulation, because at the end of it, what did you guys do with all of the documentation, work product, and things that you did?
Yeah, so much to the dismay of some of the people who I hired, we destroyed it, right? So we created some really cool stuff, like I said, like running on other operating systems that talk to Windows desktops, and they were completely interoperable based on the eventual documentation that took place. But in order for Microsoft to feel okay about showing us things and teaching us things, that was kind of the deal. So we knew that going in. And so like I said, a lot of people didn't like that, but a lot of people did like that because they didn't have to worry about stuff like writing good code or writing clean code and stuff like that, because no one was ever going to see it. It was never going to see the light of day. So at the end, we went to this place in Orange County, California, and there were these shredders that they literally shred Volkswagens in. And we just dumped all of our computers and hard drives and laptops and screens and everything into this giant shredder, and that was a really fun time.
Had a drink after, I suppose.
6.5 years of work of changing the entire way that people interact with browsers and operating systems, and then the regulatory scheme is done, and it all goes into the shredder, and you move on. It's a remarkable story, and one that I think maybe could be repeated. Lauren, we obviously had a lot of discussions about what might happen and how things might proceed. What are you hearing in DC these days? How has the zeitgeist maybe changed over the last year or two? Obviously, the Google Play win was sort of the first loss that Google took here, and I think it was, since they were untouchable, they've taken a second loss. From all reports, the ad tech trial is not going great for them either. Can you maybe just talk about, from a DC insider perspective, sure, what the word on the street is?
So this is something that you and Kara touched on earlier today, but I mean, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, okay? There has not been a significant update to the antitrust laws from the federal legislature, from Congress, in an extremely long time. These laws were passed with the sugar and oil barons in mind. They were passed to bust up trusts. And so when I got hired on the Google Play case, Paula Blizzard, who's now the head of antitrust for California, told me something that I'll never forget, which is, this is our opportunity to test whether these laws from the 1890s fit our 21st century problems. And what we're seeing now, and the buzz in DC and I think throughout the country, is our laws still work. And that is really good news, because if you pay attention to politics, it's not so easy to get anything through Congress in our increasingly polarized political climate. So I think everyone is very excited and invigorated by the fact that there's been first this loss in the Google Play case, which was a loss before a jury, which is significant in that an ordinary group of 12 people from San Francisco were able to understand how the Google Play Store works, not just from a technical perspective, which is really difficult, I'll tell you that from having studied it for a few years of my life, but also from an economic perspective and how they're being harmed. That a judge in DC, who again is not a specialist in search or advertising, knows, now he knows a lot, but when he started this case, way less than any of you, that he was able to understand it and come to the conclusion that Google's been monopolizing these markets. And now that a judge in the Eastern District of Virginia is really getting to, get to the same place in terms of understanding and cracking down on Google. And it's not just Google, there's a sentiment against other big tech companies as well, and lots of scrutiny from the courts and the legislature as well. So I think it's an extremely exciting time to be in the space, to be trying to innovate and bring competition, transparency, improving products from your side of things and from my side of things, to be litigating these issues. And so in terms of what the buzz is, in terms of what could happen with search, there's a really wide range of options that are available. So everything from divestiture, which we talked a little bit about, to what you called a more simple solution, I might call a more elegant solution, which is, redlining these contracts and getting rid of the default placement provisions for the Play Store and the search widget, and other default exclusive agreements that Google has entered into. I will say on divestiture, I think it's great that the government is exploring it as an option, because it is a very rarely invoked remedy. So Divestiture has happened like extremely few times in our history. It was used in the 1910s to break up Standard Oil. It was used in the 80s to break up the Bell Telecom network, and it had never been imposed in private civil litigation until just a few years ago, and that was to address competition in the door skins market. So like, if you look at that door over there, the liner in the middle, that's what we're talking about. And there's still no buyer for that door skins company that was ordered to be divested. So think about how complicated search is. Think about how complicated digital advertising is. Who is going to be prepared to buy and run some arm of that from Google? That's difficult. I mean, I'm sure there's someone out there that could do it, but it's not so simple as to say, well, let's just divest this part of the company and voila, competition will be restored. So I think that the government is being really thoughtful in terms of the variety of options available to it is a positive sign, and that they want to talk to industry is huge. I mean, we are but humble lawyers, and we know our limits, or at least we're supposed to. And so learning from industry players who are actually adding value to the economy and innovating and know this stuff inside and out is, I cannot underscore how valuable that is, and glad the government is going to be listening.
So, I don't know if you were going to jump in, but I had a question for you too.
Go on, yeah.
You know, you started. Thank you. That's great. You started with a remedy out of thin air. There was no opinion, and then the opinion gets issued. Which I know you've read it. Can you sort of talk about like reading that opinion and Lauren talked about just how the judge had sort of clearly understood our industry and then wrote what I would consider to be a kind of almost like a primer and a masterpiece about how our industry works. I just want to know sort of what your feelings and take were when you
Sure, yeah. Let me just come back to say the monopoly, Google being the judge ruling that Google is a monopoly is a big deal because it's going to be under a microscope always now going forward, and that's true not just here in the U.S. but also in Europe and the UK. There are multiple countries looking at Google. So I think going forward, complaints against Google are likely to be given higher importance and received more. The DOJ and other competition authorities are going to be more receptive to any complaints you might have against them imposing conditions on you which are unfair, etc. Blah blah blah. So that's one point, right? And on the cases, yes, I've read the Search case, and it's I'm always amazed by the ability of a judge like Judge Mehta to understand all the details and write an opinion which is informative to everyone, including folks who've been following this case for a while and since 2020. So it's amazing they can digest all that and spit that out. My take on, on the zeitgeist, yes, it's changed. There's definitely a big, a feeling against big tech, a feeling that something needs to be done. But these cases, in my view, are different. The Search case, in many, I think, is a much more straightforward case. There's a clear market, general search that the court can define and then take action on, as Judge Mehta has done. The DOJ won on market definition in this case, which is a big thing. The judge accepted a market definition, which may or may not happen in the ad tech case. It's just a more complicated field. Yeah. So I think there are more questions on where that will lead to. And in this case, I think, just on remedies again, incentives are important, and consumers are not as invested in using a new search engine or using a new way to search things as companies are, as you folks are. So you think you need solutions on both sides, right? You have the choice screens where you give consumers some options to choose different things, but at the same time, you have to enable folks like DuckDuckGo and Yelp and others to improve their products and services. So that's why syndicated search results from Google, good syndicated search results, which right now Bing is the only provider of those results, right, to the market. That's a useful thing to have so that others can compete. Similarly, opening up the search properties, as you call them, so that, because you all are incentivized to improve the system, and you have dollars on it. So that's much more likely to lead to systemic change, to give tools to everyone else to open up the ecosystem to businesses. I think that's where the change needs to come from. So we need to look at both sides. Otherwise, on the decision, one thing I have to mention is there's also a part of the case which looked at self-preferencing, which, the state AGs, so, there are different parties to this case, the DOJ, and there are also state AGs, and they talked about SA360 and how Google was self-preferencing itself on that platform, and it seemed, my reading of the case is quite clearly that those kind of actions will be more difficult to punish and hold Google accountable for.
Let me just jump in, because this will resonate with a lot of you. It's the Microsoft is not able to be optimized and reported through SA360 nearly as effectively as PMAX or Google is. And there's evidence that Google had kind of been stringing along Microsoft saying, oh yeah, we're going to put you in, we're going to put you in, we're going to put you in, we're going to put you in. And every time they put anybody in SA360, revenue goes up for that provider. And of course, they still haven't done it, or at least they hadn't done it by the time the decision came out. And the judge did not order Google to do that, saying, hey, these are just two rivals having a business dispute. You don't have to, play with your rival unless you have a monopoly in that market, which they don't, or he found they didn't. So that was just, if you want to know, like literally almost every issue that you deal with probably has some root in the antitrust monopoly scheme. And I cannot stress enough that like reading this opinion, it is so well written, is amazing. We've got a 68-page version of it, which again, double space, very easy to read. And he says things like, Google has the best search engine. I mean, at least in mobile. And I think there's some question that maybe Bing is okay on desktop because they do get a lot of queries in desktop. But the 19-to-1 query ratio in mobile has left Bing unable to even get good there. So there's really no way to, have in my mind at least, to have a structural remedy where you just say, okay, well, the search engine now is going to be owned by Microsoft or it's going to be owned by whoever, without just that person now having the monopoly. Like, moving the monopoly from one, company to another doesn't really restore competition. So, it's not that we're here to say, a choice screen is going to get it done because there's 15 other great search engines out there. I think the judge was very smart in saying there's not 15 other great search engines out there because nobody has access to these clickstream data flows of the query, what do they click on, what's the conversion. I mean, all the things you need to do that we've been talking about today to have relevance, right? And in search, we've made this point, if it's not relevant the most relevant search result you can get, that is a terrible search experience and you will immediately go somewhere else. So again, this is all kind of covered in the decision, and I think as you guys, if you choose to read some of it, you'll find a different vantage point or a different level to think about some of the day-to-day issues that you encounter, and maybe even some of the day-to-day conversations you have with Google kind of showing up there, and it's something you can kind of point to and say, well, it sort of seems like you're doing this thing that you're not allowed to do anymore. Might be helpful. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. We only have like 10 minutes left. I wanted to just make sure, before we continue the conversation, if anybody has any questions or wants to put a hand up, we do have folks with microphones, and we're happy for this to be an open discussion. So I want to make everybody feel like they have some agency here. If there's anything, yeah, I see a hand over there.
Or if anyone wants to sing, that was really good too.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no singing. Thank you all. Ron, you mentioned that it took 6.5 years to settle the Microsoft piece. Do we have a guide of what we think that might look like for Google?
Well, I guess it depends what the remedy is, right? In our case, the reason it took so long was predominantly that they could not get the documentation of the communication protocols correct. So that's why we had to keep increasing our staff, and you can read this in the court docket over and over again, and put more people on reading it and filing bug reports against it until we kind of gave up and just started writing it ourselves by looking at the source code and by figuring it out all on our own. So once we did that, things went rather quickly, and I think the idea is if this happens again, we'll know that, we'll have that experience, and people will benefit from that experience.
And just to add in from the legal perspective, so depending what the remedy is a really key point that Ron made. So if it's divestiture, meaning you have to spin off part of Google's business.
2 days.
I was going to say that could take a really long time. You hold an auction, you have to see who's qualified. You don't want to inject another monopolist into the mix. That can take time. If it's saying these default exclusivity provisions are not enforceable, that can be really quick. But even though you can eliminate that roadblock relatively quickly, it's going to take time for innovation and competition to be restored to this market that's been monopolized for 2 decades. And so your point about a partnership between consumers and industry and regulators, I think, is incredibly important. I mean, that's what it's going to take to have a competitive marketplace.
Can I just
Can I
go on.
just add that even over those 6.5 years, people started to benefit right away because documents that came out that were eventually certified as accurate and complete, competitors could use those documents right away. So I think, if for example, the remedy that's in the memo or the remedies that are in the memo were implemented, it would not take that long to get, the beginnings of these APIs that would get people the search results so that they could do whatever they want with it and start to innovate. Because, I as a technologist, I care about innovation, right? So that's what I personally like to see as a result of these things, the ability for people like you guys to put on your results page something that's innovative, to use AI, which I really care about very deeply. I've been an AI researcher forever, and that's what I care about.
I think you're right. I think this case is already having an effect. And the one way I think is Apple Intelligence, for example. Apple's incorporated ChatGPT, OpenAI for now, but they've been clear that it's not going to be exclusive. That they will, over time, also include other, AI-based programs to provide that service. So, I mean, if Apple were to go out, were to announce tomorrow that we're now signing an exclusive deal with Google and Gemini, and that's the only thing we're going to distribute via our phones, they're going to get attention immediately now. So, so it's already going to have an effect there, right? And in terms of, the Microsoft case, as you said, you said it's going to take a year and a half, but then it took 6.5 or something. So I think that's why I'm really in favor of pushing solutions that already exist in some sense in the market, which are things like syndication contracts, things like APIs for queries, search queries, sharing those. In fact, Google has offered those in the UK to the CMA previously. So they can build this, and they've already built some of this. So I think those are the solutions we need to push, which are already there.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a great question, a lot of energy. Totally agree with the idea that we're already seeing some of the effects of the decision, whether Apple announcing that they're getting more involved in search, something they would have done before that decision comes out, maybe not, maybe so. But also, it's about learning from the Microsoft case, right? That's really the only place we can go to learn what went right, what went wrong, what worked, what didn't. And the idea of the DOJ asking, first of all, just separating remedies from liability, I think was one innovation that the judge did, say, hey, let's take these separately. And now we're having this remedy, and we're bringing industry in early to have conversations like this. Michael and I will be going to DC to be on a panel in 2 weeks to talk to more folks. And that's all happening in real time, well before the remedies even been ordered. So the concept here is if we can learn from the mistakes or the learnings that we have from Microsoft, it's about getting more input early, thinking about what's actually workable, being practicable, and using assets and ideas that already exist to make things happen. And while the entire process may take 3 to 5 years before we have 4 or 5 different search engines that we all have different favorites of and differentiators, and 3 or 4 different search ad monetization platforms. I mean, that might take a while for the market share to get completely redistributed. But during that time, as advertisers, you should be seeing your prices come down. You should be seeing your transparency going up. You should be getting more controls. As users, you should be seeing more innovation happening with your search experiences. And again, while they might not go from 90 to 30% or 50% market share overnight, the change will happen, all along the way. So that's, I don't think we need to look at it as like this binary thing of either Google has 90% or they have 10%, and until they're 10%, we're not there. It's, we've had a frozen industry. I think Satya Nadella called it a no-fly zone for investment in search for the last 20 years. And we're already starting to see that unfreeze just from the decision coming out, even the conversations we're having with current publishers who are current Google partners, they're more open to having conversations about what the future might look like, which is something that before August 6th they weren't. In fact, we came to learn that they're not even allowed in their contracts to say that they disagree with anything Google's doing with their search experience. So the contracts are so, not only can they not change a pixel, not only can they not, not only does Apple has never sold a search text ad. They have no idea what the value of their search traffic is, Apple. So they have complete restrictions on that, and they can't even say things negative about Google search publicly, and that came out during the trial as well, which is just amazing. But it sort of the transparency of having the DOJ, the courts, and the trial is really shining a huge light on our industry, which has been really hidden in darkness for many years. So it's exciting.
I don't even. It's an important point there, right? These exclusive default contracts, they're often only talked about in terms of distribution, but they also have limitations on other innovations you can introduce on the ad tech side. I mean, Apple can't develop its own ad tech service. If it wants to use a third party, it has to first give Google the first look to say, hey, let me do this first. So there are restrictions on innovations, and the judgment talks about other services like Yahoo, Verizon, and Verizon bought Yahoo, right? And they wanted to incorporate some of that on their own phones, but they couldn't because Google wouldn't give them a straight answer. Whether that would mean they would get less revenue. Branch is another example that's talked about, in the decision as well. So I think we're really at the stage now where, the internet. People often say the internet is designed for Google, for things to be Googled. That's what the internet is designed for today. But I think we're at a tipping point where that's changing, and Google will have to start reacting maybe to what other industry players are doing and what the internet becomes, and it won't be in the driving seat anymore. So that'll be good.
Great question. Love to have another one. Yep, I see one back here. You can just yell it out. We can hear you.
I'm kind of like a defeatist on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
When I think about like a large company like Google facing any kind of measurable consequences, do you feel like there will be some kind of impactful result of this, or will they kind of appeal and lobby it into oblivion for the foreseeable future?
There will be appeals. I'm pretty confident about that. But that doesn't mean that the remedy that gets ordered, whether in Play, Search, or the ad tech case, gets delayed pending the appeal. There's a whole series of factors that go into that. You could see maybe the Ninth Circuit in Play lets the remedy go into effect pending appeal. Maybe the DC Circuit does too, and then the Fourth Circuit in the ad tech case does something different. So I think I also think that courts get that this is a matter of some urgency, and that these cases are affecting consumers and industry in real time. So I think there will be some impetus to resolve it relatively quickly, one way or the other, in terms of appeals. But then, think about what was just said a minute ago. All this evidence, what Michael put up on the screen an hour ago, was information that didn't exist in industry, and competitors didn't know about it, the consumers didn't know about it, and there's independent value to getting out there the misconduct that Google has engaged in over the last 2 decades in a variety of different industries. And then the other point I'll make is that I think it's pretty smart that the government in search is pursuing an injunctive case, meaning that they want Google to change how it operates its business rather than get Google to pay some amount of money. The $800 million settlement that we helped achieve for the states in Play was historic, absolutely. But you think Google ultimately cares that much about $800 million? Right, exactly. So I think that the government is getting savvy, and I think that there's more coming out now that is going to inject innovation and competition into the field. So have hope is the message I would try to convey.
May I also? I think I share some of your concern there, depending on what the DOJ asked for. If they're going to ask for quote unquote radical remedies like structural separation and very punitive injunctive remedies having to do with Gemini and the newer stuff that Google's developing, Google's going to fight that for as long as they can and delay. But I think if it's more practical remedies that are put forward, like the one that you put forward is one example of that. I think that's likely to lead to some resolution sooner or later. Microsoft did settle in the end, right? So,
I know we're close to time, and I just want to pick up on that, and Ron, actually probably close with you on something, but it is interesting to note that they had a chance to do an appeal, at least go for an appeal right after the judgment. They didn't do it. They've committed to going through the remedy process. In fact, interestingly, they're looking for an expedited remedy process, which we've talked about why that might be. Part of it might be because they want to foreclose industry's ability to understand what's going on and to start to comment and to think about it. So again, another reason why we're kind of putting this out there is that you guys have some power here, and the sort of sooner you realize that, the better your organizations are going to benefit from that. But I'm going to assume that there's going to be a remedy, that the remedy is going to go into effect. And Ron, you know about compliance. I think that'll be when we're here next year on stage. We'll be talking about, okay, so they lost the case, we've got the remedy. How is compliance going to work? And we talked a little about fines, and you've talked about it a little bit. Can you just give us your take on what was it that got Microsoft to comply with your requests, which were court ordered?
Yeah, so at the beginning they had to feel us out. They didn't know how technical we were going to be. How they would go to they have their best people go to the whiteboard and draw some things out. This is why we can't do this, and this is why we can't do that. So then, because I'm a technical guy, I would go up to the whiteboard and start crossing things off and showing them why they can do this and can do that. So that part took a while. I think Google already has a good understanding of what a technical committee is going to be able to do. So I think that's going to help a lot with compliance. And I don't know that Google would put up roadblocks. Because eventually what Microsoft realized was it was costing them more. It would cost them more to put up roadblocks than to comply.
Because of fines too, right?
Well, not from us. So, one of the things about the technical committee and the DOJ doesn't like to have fines as part of remedy. At least that was the case back then. So there were things that we asked for that took a long time. But at the same time, we met with the European Commission once a year, and they did have the ability to fine. So things that we had already found, they would say, you have 10 days to do this, and every day past then you don't do it, we're going to fine you €1 million a day. And things got done a lot more quickly with them. So it's going to be interesting to see if that changes.
So that's where fines could play a role, or even a structural remedy. Hey, if you're not complying with the distribution agreements, then we will take a look at doing a structural remedy and using that as sort of a Damocles sword. This has been fantastic. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for everything you've done. Thank you for your participation. Hopefully you are engaged by this topic, and we can continue the conversation, whether it's later today, tonight, or in the days to come. So it's all about making our industry more competitive, which brings innovation, transparency, and relevancy to users. So thank you so much.